Alonso Quijano was a middle-aged man with limited financial resources. His days were spent taking care of his fields, and his nights were spent reading chivalric romances. He lived in a little village on the sun-drenched plains of La Mancha. Being a dreamer, Alonso's mind was full with stories about knights, princesses in peril, and heroic adventures. He was eager to set out on his own great adventure and break free from the dull monotony of his daily existence. He wanted to be a hero like those he adored, and he longed to be one as he turned each page of his favorite literature. One evening, having just finished reading another gripping book, Alonso had an epiphany. Maybe he might also become a knight and set off on a heroic mission to revive the concepts of chivalry and justice in a society that he thought had lost its course. He became obsessed with this notion and poured endless hours into reading his books, studying the techniques of the knights, and even practicing sword fighting in his field with a stick. He changed from being a menial farmer to the brave knight known as Don Quixote. He put on a worn-out suit of armor, a shattered shield, and mounted his dependable but elderly horse, Rocinante, to finish his metamorphosis. Armed with his newfound title, he ventured out into the world with the intention of changing things and realizing his childhood dream of becoming a hero. Alonso Quijano started to feel that his existence as a humble farmer was unfulfilling as his aspirations of becoming a knight overtook him more and more. He sensed a kind of calling to live an adventurous life and accomplish his destiny as a knight. He finally made the decision to truly embrace his fantasies and adopt the persona of a knight one day. After searching through his grandfather's old trunk, he discovered some armor that had once belonged to a distant relative who had served in the military. The armor was coated with cobwebs and had been forgotten for a long time, but Alonso treasured it. He carefully put on the armor, buffed it until it gleamed, and examined himself in the dusty mirror. He was now Don Quixote, the brave knight. Next, he focused on locating a suitable weapon. A long piece of wood was turned into a robust lance by him and a local blacksmith. In the village square, he also discovered an ancient shield that he decorated with a lion's head to symbolize his valor. And last, he required a reliable horse to accompany him on his travels. The ancient, knobby mare, Rocinante, was his choice. Though she was not a majestic stallion worthy of a knight, she had been a loving companion to him for many years. Alonso experienced a thrill and a sense of freedom he had never experienced before as he rode out of his town as Don Quixote. He had set out on a new adventure and assumed a new persona as a brave knight, leaving behind his old existence. Far off in the distance, Don Quixote noticed a row of windmills while riding through the countryside. He was certain that they were giants after noticing their enormous blades spinning in the wind, and he made the decision to fight them. With a ferocious battle cry, Don Quixote charged towards the windmills, drawing his lance and giving the order for Rocinante to charge ahead. His heart grew brave and determined as he approached the windmills. He felt that it was his duty as a knight to battle these enormous monsters that were endangering the defenseless villagers. He lifted his lance without thinking, certain that he would deal a mortal blow to his formidable foe, and aimed it towards the closest windmill. But as his lance struck the windmill's blades, the shock knocked him and Rocinante to the ground. Don Quixote's garments were ripped and soiled, his lance was shattered, and he was left with cuts and bruises. Don Quixote persisted in his quest despite this obstacle. Feeling inspired, he got back on Rocinante, raised his sword, and charged back towards the windmills. He was resolved to show everyone that he was a real knight and that he would overcome any challenge to achieve his objective. However, his assault was ineffective once more, and he was flung off his horse and landed in a mound of muck. This time, though, he realized his error and returned to his senses. In the end, the windmills were just inanimate devices held in position by the wind, not enormous structures. Don Quixote was overcome with guilt and sadness as he lay on the ground, broken and injured. He saw how silly he had been and how his blind faith in his own knightly destiny had kept him from seeing the outside world. With this newfound knowledge, Don Quixote resumed his quest with the intention of growing as a knight and learning from his failures. Don Quixote came upon Sancho Panza, a straightforward farmer, as he pursued his mission. Sancho was lured to the air of adventure that enveloped the noble knight, but he was also intrigued by Don Quixote's peculiar attire and his talk of knights and chivalry. Sancho impressed Don Quixote as a devoted and reliable squire who could travel with him on his adventures. If Sancho would swear allegiance to him and take on the role of his squire, he would provide him immense renown and fortune. Sancho accepted Don Quixote's offer, happy to have the chance to serve a knight. Although Sancho was a straightforward man, he was very devoted and had a decent heart. In order to aid Don Quixote in accomplishing his objectives, he was prepared to jeopardize his own safety. Sancho was strongly loyal to Don Quixote despite the physical risks of their escapades, even if it meant risking his own life. Sancho was always there to nurse Don Quixote's wounds and give encouraging words when he was hurt in battle or during one of his numerous escapades. Sancho stuck to his commitment to Don Quixote and his lofty principles, even in the face of mockery and accusations that he was insane. Sancho shone on their adventure together that he was more than just a straightforward farmer. He exhibited bravery, devotion, and a profound regard for Don Quixote and the principles of chivalry. As the days went by and they endured hardships together, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza's friendship became deeper. They were devoted to one another in spite of all of their obstacles, and their friendship lasted until the end of their voyage. When the honorable knight and his faithful squire Sancho Panza stumble upon an inn, they make plans to stay the night. However, Don Quixote quickly finds himself involved in a fresh adventure, so their time at the inn is anything but tranquil. Don Quixote meets a stunning young woman at the inn and assumes she is a damsel in distress. To the delight of both the young woman and the innkeeper, he quickly announces his plan to save her. The young lady objects that Don Quixote is calling her Dulcinea, but he persists. The next few days are devoted to Don Quixote's attempts to earn the young woman's affection, whom he feels has feelings for him. He goes to tremendous measures to rescue her since he thinks the innkeeper and his goons are holding her captive. He creates a considerable deal of chaos and ruin in the process, which finally infuriates the innkeeper. Sancho Panza continues to be devoted to Don Quixote and makes every effort to support his master in his quest despite the absurdity of the circumstances. He gives Don Quixote guidance on what to do next while attempting to calm him down. But gradually, the bizarre happenings at the inn wear down even Sancho, who is forced to doubt Don Quixote's judgment and intentions. Since the young woman is not genuinely being imprisoned against her will, Don Quixote is ultimately powerless to save her. To amuse themselves at Don Quixote's expense, the innkeeper and his goons are only participating in his illusion. Despite feeling ashamed and degraded, Don Quixote is adamant on carrying out his mission and performing his knightly duties. The concept of chivalry and the perils of delusion are humorously and satirically examined in Chapter 5 of Don Quixote. It emphasizes how crucial it is to examine one's views and beliefs and learn to distinguish between fact and fiction. The honorable knight and his devoted squire Sancho Panza come into an unusual night going by the name Knight of the Mirrors. Following this interaction, a number of things happen that solidify Don Quixote's image as a foolish and confused man. Claiming to have come to exact retribution for the humiliations Don Quixote has inflicted upon other knights, the Knight of the Mirrors challenges Don Quixote to a duel. Sancho tries to talk Don Quixote out of accepting the challenge. There has never been a fight like the one between Don Quixote and the Knight of the Mirrors. The Knight of the Mirrors blinds Don Quixote with a dazzling light and a reflecting shield in place of conventional weapons. This just serves to highlight Don Quixote's folly as he is forced to give up on his chivalric ideals and turn to using his fists. Following the battle, Don Quixote is revealed as a companion of the Knight of the Mirrors, who informs him that facing his own reflection is the only way to overcome his misconception. Nevertheless, Don Quixote disregards this counsel since he is still adamant about his own grandeur and pursues his quest. Don Quixote is frantically attempting to escape reality, and the Knight of the Mirrors represents that reality. Don Quixote is unable to perceive the world for what it truly is because he is stuck in his delusion even after seeing his own reflection. The affluent nobles known as the Duke and Duchess are encountered by the honorable knight and his devoted squire Sancho Panza. The Duke and Duchess invite Don Quixote and Sancho to stay at their castle, making them appear kind and gracious at first. But it doesn't take long to realize that the Duke and Duchess don't really respect or admire Don Quixote. Rather, they view him as a source of pleasure and delight as well as a useful instrument for their complex practical jokes and pranks. The Knight of the White Moon, a fictitious knight, challenges Don Quixote to a duel in one of the Duke and Duchess's earliest practical jokes on the adventurer. Don Quixote's illusion is further shown when he loses the duel and is compelled to renounce his chivalric principles. Throughout their visit, the Duke and Duchess keep manipulating Don Quixote by taking advantage of his belief in nobility and chivalry to conjure up intricate scenarios for their own entertainment. They even go so far as to use Sancho Panza as a pawn in their scheme, offering him the governorship of an island in exchange for him accomplishing a string of challenging assignments. Don Quixote and Sancho eventually come to understand that the Duke and Duchess have deceived and misled them. Ever the noble knight, Don Quixote makes the silent decision to depart the castle and carry on with his mission to become a real knight. Don Quixote's Chapter 7 exposes the harshness and deceit of the ruling class. The Duke and Duchess use Don Quixote and Sancho Panza for their own amusement, using their ability to control others beneath them to display their money and power. Don Quixote and Sancho are left feeling deceived and disheartened as the Duke and Duchess' actual motivations are revealed, despite their initial generosity and hospitality. After a protracted adventure as a knight-errant, Don Quixote returns home only to become bedridden due to illness. When Sancho Panza pays Don Quixote a visit on his deathbed, they have an emotional discussion on what it means to be a hero. Despite his greatest efforts, Don Quixote regrets not being able to become a great knight. But Sancho tells him that his legacy will endure long after his passing and that his brave acts have inspired numerous people. Subsequently, Don Quixote gives up his notions of chivalry and acknowledges that he was insane all along. He begs for pardon from the people he has harmed and offers his apology. Soon later, in the company of his closest friends and family, he passes away. An era comes to an end and a well-loved character departs with the passing of Don Quixote. For many readers, Don Quixote remains a source of inspiration and optimism despite his stupidity and delusions. His ambition to lead an adventurous and heroic life serves as a reminder that bravery and fortitude are always needed in the world, no matter how challenging it may appear. Miguel de Cervantes, the author, narrating how he got the idea for the narrative Don Quixote and the sources of inspiration for his persona. He points out that although if the story is made up, it is based on actual experiences of people he has met and seen in his lifetime. Cervantes continues by talking about Don Quixote's influence on culture and society. He points out that there have been innumerable copycats and alterations to Don Quixote's persona in both popular culture and literature since the release of his tale. He believes that Don Quixote sparked an adventurous and passionate spirit that has captivated people's minds for many years. The enduring influence of Don Quixote's idealistic and hopeful message. Many people have been motivated to follow their own passions and aspirations by Don Quixote's unshakable dedication to his ideas and desire to follow their dreams, despite the fact that he was frequently viewed as foolish and deluded. Don Quixote is a metaphor of the human spirit in many ways, showing us that no matter how hard life may seem, there is always room for romance, adventure, and bravery, if we're willing to pursue it. In general, the narrative of Don Quixote functions as a fitting conclusion to the book, offering an analysis of the character's enduring influence and his idealistic and hopeful message. It serves as a reminder that, if we are willing to follow our hearts and pursue our aspirations, greatness and heroism are always possible even in the face of adversity and tragedy.